Culture Ward, where we dissect and dismantle pop culture in all its forms. 'Tis the season for creeps and spooks, ghosts and ghouls, and all things that go bump in the night. With Halloween fast approaching, we thought it was the perfect time to put together our list of the greatest horror movies of all time. From slow, creeping suspense to fast-paced blood and gore, join us as we examine the top 10 greatest horror movies ever. Before we begin, please take a second and hit that subscribe button and help us grow the channel. As always, it really means a lot to us. And don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoy the content. And now, without further ado, let's get into it. So earlier this month, we put together a list of the best Halloween movies, which included some pretty iconic horror movies, but left off so many films that are just as much fun to watch around the Halloween season. It's also interesting to see the recent renaissance of sorts around horror movies, with several huge box office hits over the past year, from Weapons and Sinners to The Conjuring Last Rites, which is currently breaking box office records. When we put together our list of Halloween movies, we had pretty strict rules for what constitutes inclusion on that list. For general horror movies, however, the qualifications are a lot looser. The genre broadly refers to thrillers and suspense, but encompasses many subgenres, including psychological horror, monster stories, ghost stories, slow burn suspense, and bloody and gory slasher and body horror films. Basically, if it has significant elements of the macabre in it, it probably qualifies for inclusion on this list, with a couple very specific exceptions that I'll mention later. And once again, this list was really hard to put together. There are so many great, foundational, iconic thrillers stretching back to the very beginning of moving pictures. But we tried to pick the 10 that best represent the genre broadly, while also being the most iconic and memorable. They might not all be the scariest, but hopefully you'll agree that they all fit the description of most important and genre-defining, and therefore, in our opinion, the greatest. At any rate, dim your lights and steel your nerves as we launch into the top 10 greatest horror movies of all time. Starting us off at number 10, we must include Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, a German expressionist silent film from 1922. Directed by silent film pioneer F.W. Murnau, Nosferatu is an unofficial, and indeed unauthorized, adaptation of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula. Many details were changed to try to distinguish it from Dracula, such as the vampire being named Count Orlok, played brilliantly by Max Schreck, and introducing the idea of Orlok bringing the plague with him. Well, despite the forced differences, Bram Stoker's widow sued for copyright infringement and actually won, with all copies of the movie being ordered destroyed. Thankfully for us, some copies survived, and the film has become regarded as one of the best films of all time, essentially creating a blueprint for horror movies going forward. Its masterful use of atmosphere and imagery resulted in a truly haunting experience that has resonated with audiences for the past 100 years. Next up is Friday the 13th, released in 1980, directed by Sean S. Cunningham and featuring an early appearance of Kevin Bacon. The premise of the film is that a group of teenagers try to reopen a summer camp that had closed down years before due to the drowning death of a young camper, with some masked stalker killing the teenagers off one by one. In a surprise twist, the killer turns out to be a middle-aged woman, Pamela Voorhees, who was the mother of the drowned boy, named Jason Voorhees, by the way, and who sought revenge for her son's tragic death. While the movie has received mixed reviews over the years, it is important for a number of reasons, not least of which is the creation of one of the most iconic and identifiable villains in movie history, the hockey-masked killer Jason Voorhees. However, side note, Jason didn't appear as the antagonist until the second film in the series, and didn't don his iconic hockey mask until late in the third movie. It was the first independent slasher film to be picked up for distribution by a major studio, with Paramount securing the rights, earning nearly $60 million at the box office on a meager $550,000 budget. This movie also expanded on the stalker subgenre of horror movies and popularized multiple tropes that are foundational, including the last girl idea and the masked killer unstoppable villain thing, first introduced in Halloween a couple of years prior. Not to mention the gigantic and enduring franchise that it spawned. Friday the 13th is an undeniable classic. In at number 8, Night of the Living Dead, George Romero's classic 1968 zombie horror film. Written by Romero and John Russo and inspired in large part by the Richard Matheson novel I Am Legend, the film follows 7 people who are trapped in a farmhouse while flesh-eating zombies hunt them. Much like other pioneering horror films, this movie was produced on an extremely low budget and made a huge profit at the box office. In fact, Night of the Living Dead earned more than $30 million worldwide, roughly 250 times its $100,000 budget, becoming one of the most profitable movies in all of cinema history. Night of the Living Dead also popularized the portrayal of zombies in pop culture, despite the fact that they weren't actually referred to as zombies in the movie, using the moniker ghouls instead. Interesting side note, due to an error in naming the original film, combined with the timing of the release, it failed to get copyright protection, and actually entered the public domain upon its release. This oversight, however, resulted in numerous remakes and adaptations, which only served to broaden the influence of the movie on culture. Number 7 is John Carpenter's The Thing, released in 1982. Based on a 1938 novella, Who Goes There?, The Thing follows a group of American researchers in Antarctica when they discover the extraterrestrial thing that assimilates and imitates other organisms. The Thing gradually infiltrates the team, taking over individual members and sowing paranoia as they struggle to identify and destroy it, ultimately culminating in a bleak and ambiguous ending. The Thing is another landmark in the horror genre, renowned for its horrific practical effects, leaning into body horror and grotesque creature design. The atmosphere of paranoia it creates influenced later films, such as the Alien sequels, and has become a pop culture staple, finding its way into video games like Dead Space and TV shows like Stranger Things. In 6th place is Wes Craven's horror masterpiece A Nightmare on Elm Street, which introduced the world to the supernatural villain Freddy Krueger and his iconic bladed glove. Released in 1984, it follows a teenage girl named Nancy and her friends as they are terrorized by a disfigured killer in their dreams. As Nancy's friends begin dying gruesomely in their sleep, their deaths manifest in the real world. Nancy's mother confesses to her that the man they see in their dreams, Freddy Krueger, was a real-life murderer that the parents killed many years ago by burning him alive. Apparently, Freddy now seeks revenge. However, Nancy attempts to fight back by luring Freddy into the real world where she appears to defeat him, although the film ends on an ambiguous cliffhanger. Definitely one of the greatest horror movies ever made, Nightmare on Elm Street launched an enduring franchise, with Robert Englund's Freddy Krueger becoming one of the most recognizable villains in film history, and the franchise has become a hallmark of the genre, giving the classic slasher formula an exciting new twist, essentially merging the classic slasher film with supernatural elements. Alright, at the halfway point, we have Ridley Scott's science fiction horror masterpiece Alien, starring Sigourney Weaver, released in 1979. The film follows the crew of a commercial space tug, the Nostromo, as they respond to a distress signal from a small planetoid. On the surface of the alien world, they encounter a parasitic creature that attaches itself to one of their crew members. It's then brought inside the Nostromo against regulation and goes on to impregnate one of the crew with a xenomorph that then systematically kills most of the crew as they try to flush it out and/or escape the vessel, leaving only Ellen Ripley and Jones the cat alive. Alien revolutionized horror with a blend of science fiction and high suspense, blending slow burn claustrophobic dread with visceral terror and a terrifyingly realistic practical creature design. Alien influenced generations of horror films to come. It was also a groundbreaking portrayal of a strong female protagonist, with Sigourney Weaver's Ripley becoming known as one of the most badass women in film history. Number 4 is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, released in 1980. Based on the novel of the same name by Stephen King, the film follows Jack Torrance, a struggling writer who takes a job as caretaker of an isolated hotel during the winter months, which requires him to live in the hotel for several months, trapped and isolated with his wife and son until the spring thaw. As the winter progresses, Jack slowly descends into madness, aided in part by the intense isolation, but also by apparent supernatural elements within the hotel itself, culminating in him trying to kill his family in an intense cat-and-mouse climax.
Here's Johnny!
Another groundbreaking achievement in slow burn, atmospheric dread and suspense, blended expertly with eerie and visceral imagery, like the iconic bathtub lady. All of these elements were aided immensely by Jack Nicholson's unhinged performance. With The Shining, Kubrick helped redefine psychological horror, forever influencing the genre going forward, and its themes of isolation and madness have continued to inspire films within and without the horror genre. While there have always been some complaints that the film departs notably from the source material, including by Stephen King himself, Kubrick's adaptation continues to be considered one of the touchstones of pop culture in general and the horror genre in particular. Alright, this one was hard. I never have felt like Silence of the Lambs was a horror movie. It feels more like a police procedural thriller, albeit with some elements of horror. However, since every piece of literature I can find on the internet seems to classify this film as psychological horror, I feel I must include it on this list, and pretty high up, since Silence of the Lambs is one of the greatest movies of all time. Released in 1991, it is based on the book series by Thomas Harris and follows an FBI trainee who is sent to interview a brilliant but deranged psychiatrist, Dr. Hannibal Lecter, in the hopes of gaining insight into another serial killer, Buffalo Bill, that the FBI are trying to catch. The film revolves around FBI agent Clarice Starling's riveting interactions with Hannibal Lecter and the clues she retrieves therefrom to eventually catch up with Buffalo Bill in a tense climax. The Silence of the Lambs elevated the psychological thriller, emphasizing character-driven suspense and intellectual terror over gore and jump scares. Of course, Anthony Hopkins stole the show with his brilliant portrayal of the manipulative psychopath Hannibal Lecter, and kind of redefined the concept of a charismatic villain. The movie won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, bringing prestige to the horror genre, and its cultural impact and influence on filmmaking simply cannot be overstated. Alright, the second greatest horror movie of all time is one I have a hard time watching. Even gathering video clips for this video's B-roll is difficult for me, because it scared the ever-loving shit out of me when I was a child. I'm talking about The Exorcist, the 1973 supernatural horror classic based on the book by William Peter Blatty. The film is centered on the demonic possession of 12-year-old Regan McNeil and the attempts to save her, first through medical intervention and then with the assistance of 2 Catholic priests who agree to conduct an exorcism on the girl. This movie redefined horror as a cultural phenomenon and popularized subgenres concerning demons and possession, themes that are still relevant to this day with the huge success of movies like Hereditary and the Conjuring franchise. The film's intense realism, helped in large part by groundbreaking special effects, sparked controversy and fascination, and it's widely regarded as one of the scariest movies of all time, especially for people like me who were raised Catholic and actually believe in shit like this. Before I get into the honorable mentions, I had to at least acknowledge a whole subgenre of macabre films that include comedy horror, or just movies that have macabre elements but don't really fit into the horror genre. Movies like Beetlejuice, one of my favorites of all time, The Addams Family, the Scary Movie franchise, Casper, The Haunted Mansion, the Eddie Murphy one that is, and many other titles that I love but feel they don't quite fit the genre. Anyway, I just wanted to put it on the record that I'm not ignoring or forgetting these top-tier movies. I'm just kind of arbitrarily, yet intentionally, excluding them from consideration. Now let's get into a few honorable mentions.
Groovy.
Our first honorable mention is Scream, another Wes Craven film released in 1996. It's a slasher film with some satirical elements poking fun at horror movie tropes while honoring those same tropes. A group of high schoolers are terrorized by a masked killer, Ghostface, who seemingly makes conscious use of horror movie tropes in his campaign of murder and mayhem. It's clever, it's self-referential, and it essentially revitalized the slasher genre. And it's just a ton of fun. The Lost Boys is another one that straddles the line between horror and horror comedy. Directed by Joel Schumacher and released in 1987, The Lost Boys is a modern vampire tale following 2 brothers who move to a small California town with their mother, only to find out the town is overrun with the undead. With some genuine scares, this movie served to bring the vampire subgenre into the future with its pop culture references and its portrayal of hip, youthful vampires that went on to influence franchises like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the Twilight series. It's one of my favorite movies of the 80s. And Jaws, released in 1975. Probably should have made the top 10, but I didn't know where to put it. Directed by Steven Spielberg, Jaws is a movie about a killer great white shark terrorizing the beaches of a small island and a group of men who team up to hunt it down. A hallmark of the creature feature horror genre, with an iconic score by John Williams, it is a defining classic and actually contributed to widespread fear of sharks for years to come.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, it's time to reveal the #1 greatest horror movie of all time. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, released in 1960, is the original slasher movie. The film revolves around a woman who steals money and hides out at a roadside motel known as the Bates Motel. There she encounters the manager, Norman Bates, who is revealed to have a split personality tied to his domineering mother. Spoiler alert, in case you've lived your entire life isolated amongst the Sentinelese peoples off the coast of India, in probably the single most iconic horror movie scene ever, Norman Bates murders the woman while she's in the shower. That murder leads to an investigation that unravels Norman's dark secrets. Psycho truly revolutionized the horror genre, ushering in a new era of psychological depth and shocking twists, along with eliciting visceral emotion through the use of atmosphere, suspense, and an unsettling score by Bernard Herrmann. One of Hitchcock's most enduring classics, this movie marked the beginning of the modern age of horror storytelling and introduced the archetypal villain Norman Bates, making an indelible mark on pop culture that's still felt to this day, 65 years later. Psycho is one of the greatest films of the 20th century and undoubtedly one of the defining films of the horror genre. And that's why it sits at #1 on our list. So, as I briefly mentioned in my introduction, we seem to be going through something of a horror renaissance right now in 2025. From critically acclaimed films like Steven Soderbergh's Presence or Zach Cregger's Weapons, to record-breaking blockbusters like Sinners or The Conjuring: Last Rites, 2025 has seen renewed interest in the genre in an otherwise very slow year at the box office. But as we've seen through this list, the horror genre has been a staple of the cinema since its inception, with Georges Méliès's La Manoir du Diable, or House of the Devil, premiering in 1896, long before the horror label even formally existed. The 1930s saw the advent and proliferation of the monster film, with Dracula in 1931 leading the way, followed by Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, The Invisible Man, and many others. Since that time, horror has evolved and branched out, creating multiple subgenres and hybrids, and always remaining in the cultural consciousness. People are drawn to the horror experience for the visceral thrills and adrenaline rush, for emotional catharsis, allowing them to confront and process their own fears, and, according to Carl Jung, tapping into the shadow self where they can explore their own dark emotions. And of course, through the decades, there have been numerous cultural touchstones within the horror genre that people share as a community, from Psycho's shower scene to Jaws' foreboding approach music. People bond en masse over the shared experience of these pop culture landmarks. But most of all, horror is just fun. We enjoy the creativity, the iconic villains, fascinating and oftentimes disgusting visuals and special effects, and the sheer spectacle of it. A good horror movie can have the same effect as riding a terrifying roller coaster, where you take pride in your ability to put your arms in the air and scream in glee as you plunge into the abyss. It's always been one of my favorite types of movie. Growing up in the 80s, there were tons of cheap, fun, and often hilarious low-budget horror movies that we just had so much fun devouring and bonding over the shared experience. I hope you enjoy horror as much as I do, and as Halloween rapidly approaches, I hope you would drink your fill of this weird, wild, and electrifying genre. So what do you think of our list? Do you agree, or did we get it totally wrong? What horror movies would you add or change? Join the conversation in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. We hope you have a fun and fright-filled Halloween. Bye for now. We hope to see you next time in the Culture Ward.